Well, thankfully, we have 6 extraordinary leaders with us today to discuss industry leadership through times of change. With us is Leonie Freeman, CEO, Property Council. She needs no further introduction, but she insisted on it. So she has extensive experience in the New Zealand property industry, having held top positions in both the public and private sector. And the bit that I like about her story is the realestate.co.nz one there. And if you're not aware of what she did around the internet, then you've been hiding in a hole. John Dakin, CEO, Goodman Property, who oversaw a 64.7% increase in annual net profit for Goodman's, 50,000 square metres of space leased out in the past year, and value increased to $2.6 billion for 2018. Peter Mence, CEO, RDC Property, who posted a record profit of $133.6 million in 2018 and became the first listed property company to issue green bonds. Angela Bull, CEO, Tramco Group, with $1.8 billion in assets. And just something to tell you about Angela, one of her claims to fame is that she always tries to get home or to see her kids to read them a bedtime story. But I've got a little bit of a concern around that because I think she's being a bit duplicitous there. Reading this annual or the daily sales accounts to your kids to get them to go to sleep within 2 minutes really doesn't count, Angela, but we'll leave you on that one. Louise Mason, CEO of Stockland, with some $10 billion in their property portfolio that covers shopping centres, logistics and business parks, office assets. And she's was the president of the Property Council's New South Wales division from February 2016 to February 2019. And Ken Morrison, CEO, Property Council Australia, a director of the Green Building Council of Australia, deputy chair of the Business Coalition for Tax Reform, sits on the executive committee of the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, and is a property male champion of change, promoting women in leadership roles. Well, it's quite an introduction, ladies and gentlemen. The first thing I'm going to do is start out with a question to you, John. Describe for me your change process, what you've been through with Goodman's.
Thanks, Ward. Good afternoon, everybody. Feeling quite intimidated by my company up here after that introduction. But look, I think it was interesting, picking up on what John Key said this morning about disruption. The world at the moment we're faced with all these things coming at us. We've got our Airbnbs and our Ubers and our Amazons and our Alibabas and all this change, coming at us, and decisions we've got to make in the real estate sense are very long-term in nature. So, what we've been trying to work through at Goodman in the last sort of 5 years in particular is what does all that mean, and that's helped develop our strategy in terms of not just locally but internationally. The world's going through the greatest period of urbanisation that we've ever seen. So there'll be more square kilometres of the planet urbanised in the first 30 years of this century than there ever has been in the history of humanity. So we've got 2.5 people that are going to be urbanised in the next 30 years. Most of them, the bigger cities will get bigger, like your Sydneys, like your Aucklands, like your Beijings, like your Shanghais. And so that's one big trend that we've thought about. And so that's kind of zero in our focus on fewer, bigger markets. The second is around consumerism, and the big trend coming through the industrial sector is the e-commerce and the rise of Alibaba and Amazon, and that's a structural change that doesn't come around that often. So we've responded to that in a number of ways. And finally is around the consumers' insatiable desire for convenience that we can't see changing. So, from that point of view, we're starting to increasingly own properties that are closer to those consumers. So there's a few high-level thoughts, Ward.
Well, John, if you've gone through the process, Leonie, you're proposing to go through the process of strategic change with the Property Council there. John's mentioned Alibaba and Amazon. You've been involved in technological change and IT change, if you like, within platform change is a better way of putting it. How do you see that impacting the work that you wish to achieve for the Property Council?
Yeah, I think there's always times of change, and I think it's important that we're always open to what's happening, because some of the challenge when you go through change is we look around and a lot of people struggle with change and the pace of change. And if you sit there and think that the pace of change is increasing, then it is. So sometimes when I talk about this stuff, I have a slide and it talks about the length of time it takes to on certain technological changes to reach 50 million users. So when the radio was first introduced, it took 38 years to get 50 million users worldwide. When TV came, it took 13 years to get those same number of users. When the internet came along, it was shortened to only 4 years. Twitter was introduced, I think it took 9 months to get 50 million users. And when Pokemon Go was introduced, it took 19 days. So if you do sit there and think that the pace of change is increasing, it certainly is. So then the question becomes, how do we manage it? Because on one side, a lot of us think, yeah, it's really exciting by all these possibilities, but on the other, we worry about, can we keep up with it? So one thing is understanding how people react and how you manage that change process. And then on the other side, I think it's about really clearly having that strategic vision and purpose. Because all the things that I've done over the years, and I've played a lot in this transformation change space, it always starts not with what you're trying to do, but with the purpose. So what is that why behind it? Then the strategic plan comes, and then it's about how you take people on the journey. And I suppose one of the things I've learned the most is, and you touched on the realestate.co thing. Today it's really obvious, but I can tell you in 1995, people thought I was absolutely crazy. And the real estate industry used to tell me, Leonie, nobody will ever buy property this way. And so one of the things you have to have there is just about, if you really believe in it, you've just got to keep going. Because you do get to that tipping point. I touched on the story of Peter Cockett, he was instrumental in that. But just to give you the context of the internet back then, we used to tell the agents when we launched the website, fax us a listing form and post us a photo. So that is how we got the data on the internet, and hardly any company in New Zealand at the time had an email address. So, now it's commonplace and nobody questions it. So I encourage you all to think about where that next bit comes from. So, I've done a lot of work in the last few years on solving the housing crisis. I look at property council and I'm looking at saying, let's transform our industry so that we can actually fix some of the challenges. We don't have to look at it and think that government will solve it. And, some people again saying, look, we can't solve this, but we actually can. We just have to find a way and we just have to persevere. And then the other thing is that, people have said to me, so what's the equivalent you see of realestate.co today in property? So I'm going to put it out there because I think it's blockchain. And I think that is that equivalent transformational thing. And I know a lot of people say, that's completely crazy, but trust me, I've been told I'm crazy plenty of times. And that is something I think we need to think about. So,
Never was much authority as this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow on a little bit from where you've been, Leonie, because just looking across the panel here, I've probably had more opportunity to see change than anyone by a few years, I suspect, because I started life as a panel beater and I obviously wasn't very good at it. I then went through engineering and I've seen a lot of change come through there. But the thing that really strikes me is that the cause for change, the enabler of change, and the adoption for change is the people you surround yourselves with. That's the key enabler. And I think, it's worth, I remember years ago, I was working with a boss, general manager, who pulled me aside for my annual performance review, and let's just say, it did not go well. And he was saying that I needed to be more cynical, and I needed to trust people less, and I needed to be a little less ethical in the way I handled things. And I struggled with that. I came back the next day and I said, well, that's just not who I am. And if I have to be that sort of person, then I don't want to succeed. That's not what I'm doing. And there's a key lesson in there for me, and that's congruity between who you are and the way you behave and the way you run your business. I've been incredibly fortunate during my career to work with some terrific people. And I think the drive there is to get people who do have that inner integrity and congruity between what they believe, what they do, and if they do, then they're able to effect change and they're able to be resilient to the challenges that change brings with them. So I think the key really is the strength of the people.
I'll pick up on the resilience point too. We're facing in Australia perhaps slightly tougher economic times than New Zealand, where we've had certainly a larger downturn in the resi market, and like the whole world, retail is challenging. Something that sort of we've realised, and the property industry does, and at Stockland, we've got a whole group of people with our organisation that have never lived through an economic downturn. And the fear when they see actually times are more challenging, we've guided to flat growth in FY20. There's a lot of people there, whereas I started in 1990, so I lived through the political recession we had to have. I was wonderfully ignorant then. I was 2 or 3 years into my career and it all just went over my head. But then lived through the GFC and the need to sell properties to meet redemptions, etc. And I think as leaders, we have to realise there's a lot of people within our industry that have never had to face into the challenges that exist now, but then also in relation to change, that when there are challenges, we do have to change. As you said, John, retail is a structural change in retail, and people have to think differently. But it's a real skill to teach people, I think, but it does grow their resilience. If you face into that change or that challenge and you think differently, rather than pulling the shutters and saying it's all too hard for me, it grows incredible resilience that's with you for the rest of your career.
One of the things that helps with resilience, I think, is where you've got a purpose, where you know, to your point, I think, Leonie, and it creates great people in your team as well. When you know what you're there for, you all know what you want to achieve, and that's the sort of side of it, I think. So making sure you communicate why you're there and what you want to do, and everyone feels that way. But to your point, Gordon, I've got to throw in reading the stories, because he told me he was going to say that. The other part is about valuing, I guess, your whole of life in terms of who you are and who your people are. So modelling your behaviour. So yes, I do make sure I go home to read my children's stories, but also I do kindy drop off and pick up, and I'll go and watch cross country and that sort of thing. And then I expect that people in my team do that as well, because part of who you are and how you get the most out of people is recognising that it's a whole of life. And every one of you has got an iPhone, you've probably checked it 10 times already in the last 10 minutes, because you don't just stop work and life and think that that's your balance anymore. Your balance is actually 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, trying to make sure you're doing the right thing by all of those aspects of your life. And I think if you have people that feel comfortable with what they're doing, that you're comfortable with how you're living your life, and that sort of positivity and purpose passes through. I mean, you have bad days and you have various things, but I think that creates that resilience and that sense of you turn up to work because you want to do something and you want to change, you want to create something. And in property, we all want to create something as well. That's where you get the satisfaction.
I think the extension of that, going back to what Peter was talking about around people, is culture. And I think this has been one of my big learnings over the last 5 years or so, is how important culture is. An age-old strategy that culture eats strategy for lunch, and that in your organisation there is a certain sort of culture that can help make the organisation successful, and that you've got to be able to manage that culture the same as you would manage your bottom line, or that you would manage your structures, and making sure your structures are right in the organisation, because you can take highly successful people and take them into your organisation, and they're just not going to work in your organisation because it's not the type of organisation for them. They are not going to be able to be the type of person or the type of leader that you need in your organisation. So it's when you're thinking about people, it's not just have they got technical capabilities, have they got the experience in this type of role. It's the cultural affinity and the cultural alignment. I think it's important to me.
One of the questions I want to put to you as a panel, you've spoken about the culture, and we often talk about the future of business changing, more flexible working arrangements, Angela, 4-day weeks, the impact of AI, some of the globalisation. But if we've got a culture that says that we want to work less, we want to spend more time with our families, and then we look across at, say, the countries in Asia, China, we look at Japan, where it appears to our eyes that the culture has worked to drop, are we going to drop out of the race to succeed economically? It's a general question. Pick it up.
I'll start. So no organisation is going to be successful without great people. And if you think about what's going on in Australia and New Zealand and the demographics of those two countries, the war for talent, talent has won and will win for the rest of our life and times. The demographics are that attracting talent, keeping talent in the organisation is going to be absolutely critical to success. So you can't just use people up and spit them out. That's not a business model that's going to work for many organisations. It certainly wouldn't work for the Property Council of Australia. So that means that you have to be able to make sure you've got people who want to be in the organisation, and that means you need to be responsive to their needs. But not everyone wants to work less. It is that recognising that people are people and they have a life as well, and you need to be flexible around those things, but they also want to do great things. So they're looking for organisations that can do great things, which goes back to the purpose that we started.
Yeah, I think, maybe just add to that, they're getting the value set, and I think Peter touched on this before, that you want to work for an organisation where your values are the same as the organisation's, and we've done a lot of work on this in the last sort of 6 or 7 years, and got a really strong set of values that we brought into the business around team respect and open and fair, performance and drive, and innovative and dynamic and customer focused. And when we brought them in, we've spent a lot of time trying to embed them in the organisation so that when the people change, then the values of the organisation are so strong that if people don't fit them, they get spat out. And when we sort of brought it in and it was kind of working but not really working, and we decided to tie it to people's remuneration, and that really got people focused. Because and then we had one guy who he wasn't very good on the values, and we sat him down at the end of the year and said, look, you haven't cut it on the value stuff, and so your bonus is half what it was last year. And he said, I don't think they're coming until next year. So clearly not a keeper. So you kind of, if you get that framework right, then it sort of becomes a little bit self-selecting too, I think, in your business, because people, they don't fit that, or they go and they get spat out of the machine pretty quickly. But I think the way people work, like Angela said, totally different. We're all wandering around their phones, checking them all the time. And if you've got people that are engaged, then they'll go the extra mile. That doesn't mean they can't go and watch their son at the run races or whatever. In fact, that's probably more important to them now, because I think a lot of the young generation that are coming in and going, well, look, yeah, I'll come and work for you, but I've got to go to yoga at 11 o'clock on Tuesdays, and I've got to walk my dog on Thursday, and so that generation coming through it and looking at things quite differently. So I think you really got to cater for that.
And it doesn't mean that they work less productively.
No, it's not about the number of hours.
Sometimes you get your best ideas when you're outside the office and you're doing something, and it's that realisation too that I think all leaders need to have. You don't need to be face to face with your person, with your teams and your people to think they're working. If you do, if you think, I don't want my team working flexibly or working from home, they all have to be here in the room with me, then you've got the wrong people, because you're not treating them with respect.
Or you're wrong.
You're wrong, that's right. And you want people to be responsible and accountable. And I don't care whether that's living up the coast or being at their desk or working from somewhere else. As long as the work's done at the end of the day, whatever makes them most productive is fine.
I could give you plenty of examples of people who will work fewer hours and achieve more than if you tie them to their desk for 60 hours a week. Well, we let people have a really good, we don't insist on them working more than 80 hours a week.
Well, it's also about giving people that opportunity, and if you get your purpose right and the values are right, and you've got the right people, then you don't need the necessary people all in that office checking things. The other thing is that, to me, it's about how do you create the culture of transformational change and continuous improvement, because you need everybody working together to get that. It's, what I find is you often have somebody who's got a bit of an idea out here and somebody over there and somebody over there, and it's often an osmosis of how you get that, and so that to me comes back to culture. The one thing I would add too is that you're touching on numbers of hours of work. Really, to me, it's not just about hours work, it's about creativity, because that creates the change. So how do we create spaces for that? The one thing I would add though, because I come from perhaps a slightly different background than these guys sitting here, in that I'm sort of an entrepreneur, and I can tell you that when you invest every dollar that you own in the world into a business that is losing money, you work really hard to turn it around. So, there are times in your career where you work exceptionally hard, and for those that work for themselves and have been in that entrepreneurial journey, you do work really hard, because if you don't, you can get into major financial trouble. So I found that it comes back to that purpose and what's the drive behind it, and what is the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Angela, I just worry a little bit when I hear this around hours that, getting rid of the 40-hour week, moving to maybe an outcomes-based versus output. Are we facing a baby bathwater situation where the hard fought-for rights that our great-grandparents fought for to get the 8-hour work day locked in will be thrown out, and eventually the pressure's going to go on to increase working hours?
I think people are doing more than that now, because you're talking about a world where it was clock in at 9, clock out at 5:30, take your half hour for lunch. And I don't think anyone in this room probably works like that. In fact, I can't think of many people who work like that now. Even in terms of shift work, it's a whole different approach, because there's a health and wellbeing component to it. There's wanting to ensure that there's the right thought processes, health and safety as a starter, so you're trying to manage all that. So I don't think that looking back too far helps us in thinking about how we work going forward in terms of the future. I think in terms of looking forward to the future, we have to think about talent and how we're going to attract the talent that's there. The other thing is that people used to think that they got a career, they studied, they did this career, and that was the career for life. And they might change jobs maybe once or twice in their career, maybe, and that would be it. And that's just, I don't think, the reality of things now. Things are moving at such a pace, and people's appetite for change in that environment is such that people are much more prepared to pivot in their careers and to look for new challenges, to look for different work conditions, work environments, geographies, everything that means that people are much more nimble in the way that they're approaching their work. And so it's not start work when you're 18 or 20 or whatever and retire at 65, thank God, and now I'll have the life I always wanted. Now it's actually I want the life I've always wanted right now, and I'll work to fund that, and I'll make sure that I'm constantly challenged and stimulated and happy and doing everything, because there's no trade-offs, I just want everything.
Louise, is that true though for retail? I mean, you're invested in that sector, and you've still got to open the shop as well. In New Zealand at least, it's going to be open at 9 o'clock. I noticed they tend to do different hours here. They were open a lot later last night than they would be back in New Zealand.
Right.
But you're running a 9 to 5:30 work day there. Is it true for there, or does that need to change as well?
I think it does need to change. I think it's probably, retail has been a sector that has gone well for a very long